last few come in. So before you all joined, we had a quick rendition of Om Shanti Om, Bollywood, I know it from a Bollywood movie, Om Shanti Om. And so 6 of us here were doing our thing. We were doing our Indian music. So be relieved that you were in the waiting room and you were not put on, you didn't have to see that.
And I know I look like the person who's Indian, but I did not initiate this. That was hilarious. Actually started from the Buddhist, Tony's Buddhist version, and Sylvette took it to a whole new level. So good job, Sylvette.
All right, Sylvette, on that note, why don't you launch us forward?
I will. Do we have slides? There we go. Awesome stuff. So welcome. Our second session in our series of strategic conversations. We are ready to rock and roll, as you can tell. Thank you, Tony. If we'll go to the next one, and we'll do our quick review of last week. Awesome session last week. So many fabulous insights, and the things that we covered included understanding the value of strategic thinking when we get all the stakeholders on board. And we talked about the benefits of having those different viewpoints and getting everyone on board, including the additional buy-in and motivation that occurs for all of our stakeholders when they can participate. And then Jackie took us on a tour through SOAR. Hey, that rhymes, a tour through SOAR. And we sort of got to understand the foundations. And then we did a quick review on what is a simple model, the quick SOAR model that we're going to have a look at today. And just a brief overview on the AI 5D cycle and how the SOAR model works together. And that will be next week. So important thing to remember from last week and transitioning over, it's still all about creating those generative questions, thinking now in terms of strategic questions. So that's our review, and we're going to forge ahead with Fasia is going to introduce fostering conversation, strategic conversation. So Fasia, take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sylvette, and welcome team. So what we'll do right now to start, maybe if we can go to the next slide, is just do a quick check-in. We'd love to hear from you a few examples perhaps in the next couple of minutes on if you've had a strategic conversation over the last week, what may have made it strategic in your opinion, and what kinds of questions you may have asked. So if I can ask you to type into the chat box, that I'll share, and maybe we can call on a couple of people to share, just share your strategic conversation, a question you may have asked. And remember, nobody puts something in the chat, then that's an opportunity for a voluntold. So I don't want to have to pick on anyone, but I will if I have to. Just kidding. I'm sure you have one example or two examples, quick ones. Just doesn't need to be long, just a very quick brief, sharing with the group. So let's see, who do we have in the chat? We have a couple of people here. Awesome. So why don't we have Jamie, and I see Carol offering, so I appreciate that. So maybe Jamie, we can ask you to go first. We can have you please unmute yourself. And if you could briefly share your conversation, that would be fantastic.
Sure. We hadn't met since April as a team, and so we've done a lot of learning, I think in general, and then our team has been doing a lot of work with your group. And so even just the team meeting format was problem-based. What are all these problems we're anticipating and planning for the year? And it was not a successful meeting. I tried to do over, I facilitate those. It's an old format, not so good. So we talked the next day about why that didn't work and how could we, we're not operating from the right frame. And so how can we operate from a different frame and look for the opportunities this year in creating all new things in a way that's very different than what we know and supporting our districts, and even put that into our team meeting format so that there's generative discussion around name it, frame it, flip it, and just some things where we're looking solution focused, but really generative and looking at those as opportunities. So it just felt, you could literally feel the energy change in the room by just having those discussions and looking strategically at not just our meetings, but how do just the simple act of our meetings translate into the work that we will be doing and supporting other educators who are in the same situation. And there's a lot of problems to consider, and how do you change that lens a little bit and just operate from a different frame.
Right, so sounds like you had everyone's buy-in. Maybe that experience of what it was like when that didn't happen provided, seems like, an impetus to switch things around.
Yeah, it certainly felt like that.
Nice.
My other team members around here, they can probably speak to that.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you so much for sharing. And Carol, would you mind sharing with us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So last week, I led 2 strategy meetings based on the SOAR model. They were the same strategy meeting, but 2 different groups of people because we had to have a limited number of people in the room. We've come a long way since we've been getting them together, and there was a really positive feedback on this model. Last year we did the traditional SWOT method, and then of course humans being humans tend toward the negative, so they just talked about the weaknesses and the threats. The rest of that's what their focus was on. But the feedback I got was very positive. They loved the SOAR method. I felt like there was better sharing than we've ever had with these people. So I was really pleased. We had them start the morning by sharing a bright spot, which is a term from the book Switch by Dan and Chip Heath, and just share like a story that just like a high point from the last year. And it was just a wonderful way to start the day on a really positive level of like, what are we doing well? How's it going? Tell us just your favorite story. It was just awesome.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we will capture everything that you're writing in the chat as well if somebody should, want to see some other examples. So let's go on today to the next slide to see what we will cover off this week. So here are sort of the objectives of the call today. We want to cover with you the 3 elements of strategic conversations. And then we'll talk a little bit about SOAR as a framework for these conversations. And then how do we use positive framing and generative questions at different levels of the organizations using this particular framework. So the first, important element in strategy, of course, is language. And I'm sure if you look at all of these words, mission, vision, values, they may strike a chord with you. You probably have heard them in the context of strategy or strategic thinking and strategic planning. And just out of curiosity, did anyone have an opportunity to take a look and try and find their organizations, whether it was your strategic plan or vision or mission? If you could type that in the chat box. And if you could just move to the next slide, Tony, please. And where was it easy to find? And where is your team sort of hosting these kinds of things? And are they using this type of language? Somebody said, no, not easy to find. Yeah, I can relate. Okay. And we're not easy to find. Yeah, it looks like empty words. That's right. Not really having meaning. Okay, so someone said that their company doesn't even have a strategic plan. So I think this is one really important point. I can tell you from experience, right? Typically when you develop strategy, a lot of times it's developed and it's put somewhere nice, a thing to do, check off the box, move ahead. Really, it's meant to sort of guide your decisions, right? It should be something we can all reflect back on. So it's important as we as you're learning this methodology, if your company doesn't have a strategic plan, might this be an opportunity for you to clarify the language, see where it's stored, and then, think about how you may want to help develop that. So this is the first thing to kind of be conscious of, is there's lots of different ways to articulate it. So language is important. The second factor is alignment. Obviously, if you don't know strategy exists or where the strategic plan is, that poses a problem in itself. However, in order for a strategy to be effective, you need alignment across the organization. That means every individual, team, department, division, the whole ecosystem has to be holding hands and rowing in the same direction. I think that makes sense to us intellectually. Implementing it and modeling it within an organization can be challenging. So I think this is the whole premise of SOAR, is by involving all of the different stakeholders. As you see, you'll see in the next factor, the third factor really is around stakeholder engagement. And what stakeholder engagement does is that it creates ownership, right? And I think we heard in the first example, when you had everyone go through one experience, I think everybody aligned on what that looked like. When you moved on to a different experience, I think having everyone's engagement, creating that ownership, can lead to implementation and alignment throughout the whole organization. So that's sort of a quick overview of the 3 key factors. Are there any questions around these?
Thank you, Fasia. All right.
Thanks.
Yeah, and this last one is who has a stake. Just think about the stakeholders that have to be involved. So yeah, the focus is still on conversations, but strategically. And you have choices. An example we sent you last week was just a quick SOAR that one of our colleagues, Joan MacArthur Blair, did, where she brought a group at the senior level together, and all they wanted to do was to revisit the values, vision, mission, and have a conversation about this before they began on a year-long process and how they would bring in the stakeholders. So when you're pulling people together, sometimes it's to formulate a strategy, and that's really what Fasia and I are going to talk about today. And then next week, you'll hear more about strategic planning, which Sherry and Lisa will get into, and they're going to give you a wonderful example at the industry level. Sometimes you have to talk about the implementation of your strategy and what are the strengths and so on and so forth that help you. So SOAR is meant to be very scalable. It's a framework. The very first article written in 2003 called it a model. And when you put a model out there, a model is very specific and people want to test. It's a framework, as you saw last week, of how you can use it in everyday conversations. And you shared that at the beginning. And today, Fasia and I are going to take you quickly through, I'm going to take you quickly through 2 examples because you can read about them, but really looking at how to do what we call a quick SOAR. And a quick SOAR could be anywhere from an hour to a half day or 4-hour day strategic event that you're going into. And so the conversations are around a strength reflection, which we heard today. We heard the example of exploring opportunities, aspirations, and results. And what's key here is you don't have to do it SOAR. You might bring a group of people together and they're very results driven, and then you'll talk about what are the results we're looking for, and then they may explore opportunities and what they care about and strengths. So you can do these in any order that you wish to do them. So the first example we have on the next slide is we've learned over the years that people do a quick SOAR just to self-assess themselves, doing a valuation on, what are the strengths that I have, the opportunities, aspirations and results, and being able to use this in coaching your kids. There's several of you involved in education and using this. We threw an example out last week of how this is being used with middle school and high school kids. So SOAR and you can be developed literally at your level. And in your workbook on page 19, we have an example of how you can do a SOAR assessment on yourself. All right, next slide. let's move to the level of working into coaching. We have several coaches on the call with us. And we've learned over the years that SOAR can be used as a coaching process. And so in your workbook, we've given you a table that talks about, you know, it's so important when you're coaching somebody to meet people where they're at. What's going on for you? You don't know what that answer will be. You don't know, remember, you don't know if they're going to be below the line in a dark place, at the line, or above the line. But you got to meet people where they're at. And then you begin to coach them. What is it that you'd like to do? Or, you know, we have 15 minutes here today. How can I help you best? And explore the possibilities. So I'm looking on page 20 if you have your workbooks in front of you, and you can use SOAR to literally coach somebody through their strengths, their opportunities, their aspirations, and results. And we've given people permission to use what's on the top of page 20 and to put it into different languages to use as they are coaching people. So SOAR is meant as a coaching process, and these very different levels that we're going to talk to you about SOAR today is in chapter 6 in the Thin Book of SOAR. It was a brand new chapter because we realized that SOAR was used individual level, the team level, and all the ways that people are using it to developing the team. In the chat box, Sherry, even though we can't see Sherry today, she put out a question about working on her team or using SOAR to align with the organization. I work for a university. We have a university strategic plan, but each of the 16 different departments, which include 5 colleges, we have our strategic plan, and it all has to be aligned. And within each department, so that strategy just isn't the senior leader's job. Strategy is everybody's job in the organization that I work for, and really developing a culture that everybody's job is to have a strategy down from themselves to their team, aligning with the organization. So these are just all kinds of examples that we've seen SOAR used in teams. All right, I'm going to give you 2 examples quickly because you guys can read about these in the Thin Book of SOAR. And then Facia is going to share with you 2 examples within her organization, how she has used SOAR. So the first example here that you can read about it was a Friday afternoon that I got a call from a woman. Her first name is Cheryl. And she said, you know, Jackie, on Monday, I have about 4 hours and I need to create a strategy for this leadership development program I want to put together. And she said, and I really need to get funding to get these students to the first presidential inauguration of Barack Obama. And so it's in the book, but she just simply said, people really committed to when they understood what can we build on, what can we do, what do we desire to be, how do we know we're succeeding. And she said at the end of the day, someone says, if we can get funding to send these youth to Washington, we are succeeding. And then we'll develop that program as we're on the bus to Washington, D.C. And not only did they get enough funding to send the youth to Washington, D.C., they were able to pay for the chaperones and the director. So that's just one example, and you can read about that, the question.
Are you there, Jackie? Okay. Okay, it looks like we have a little freezing here. Is it just me? No, everybody else?
Yeah.
I don't know, Facia, do you want to step in?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe what we can do, Lisa and Tony, is we can jump to my 2 examples and I can share those while Jackie reconnects, and then Jackie can speak back to these examples. So here are a couple of real life examples. So I don't know if you know this about me, but I work for a pharma company. And one of the challenges that we had well, actually just last year, I was going to say a couple of months, it feels like a couple of months, but last year was that, you know, we are launching into a therapeutic area as New Kids on the Block. trying to compete for market share, and in a space where there are some heavy hitters, so companies who've been entrenched in that space, they have the loyalty of the customers. So how do we, as new kids on the block, try to compete, basically try to be considered as an option? And we did the traditional thing, which we do all the time in the corporate world, which is look at our data, look at the science. How do we differentiate? You know, what are our competitors known for? Where is it that Lilly can stand out, et cetera? And of course, you know, you can only go so far with that. And I thought, you know, here's an opportunity. And I kind of reframed and said, you know, let's put all of that aside. What if we were to think about what it means for us to be a leader in this field? You know, is that the positioning that we want to have? And we aligned that, yes, you know, that should be our aspiration, is to be a leader in this new field, even though there are companies who have been entrenched in it over, you know, for over 2 decades. So what I liked about this example is that we actually started with aspirations. So that's one of the beauties of SOAR is, well, one of the 2 beauties, I feel. One, it can be quick. You can take your time with it and do a 1 or 2 day SOAR. In this, you know, instance, we used a quick SOAR. We had a few hours and we said, you know what? Yeah, we love this new reframe of what do we want to be known for? We started with aspirations. Everybody was excited, got aligned, and then they said, okay, if this is our aspiration, how will we measure success? You know, what would those KPIs look like? What are the outcome measures we want to include? And then it boiled down to, what do we really want our customers to say? Sometimes it's beyond just numbers and metrics, right? What's the impact we want to have? And then we jumped to the sprints. So we said, okay, where are the therapeutic areas where we are leading? So let's look at our legacy. Let's look at our history, you know, diabetes, neuroscience. We are leaders in that field. What did we do to get there? You know, what are we doing really well that is impacting our customers and, you know, impacting patients and improving outcomes? So we did a bit of an analysis there and prioritize what sort of strengths, you know, would be feasible for us to pull through in this new area. And then we went to the opportunities and said, you know, how might we delight our customers? Because that's what we're really after. We're not really thinking about, you know, it's just about prescriptions. It's really, we want to be that company who can delight our customers beyond our medications. It's much more than that when you aspire to be a leader in the field. So that's an example of a quick SOAR. I think it took us just around 2 hours. And again, we didn't follow the SOAR, like very scripted approach. You know, this allows flexibility. So we started with aspirations and kind of went from there. So that's one example. I'll share with you one other example. This was a little bit broader. So I was speaking at a conference and it was all about, you know, value-based solutions in healthcare. And as one of the panelists, I was asked the question, you know, how can we accelerate value-based solutions in healthcare? And I had to think about that because I thought, you know, we had myself from a pharma perspective, we had a digital healthcare technology, we had some agencies doing their own, you know, startup kind of companies, and then we had a large company who was investing in healthcare. So sort of different stakeholders, different perspectives. And I thought to myself, well, you know, the ideal scenario here would be to break down the silos. All these traditional silos, we're all working in parallel. We're all spending all kinds of money and time. How could we collaborate, you know, to share what we have and work towards our common goal, which at the end of the day is improving patient outcomes? How might we do that? And of course, sounded like a good thought, right? But then I was charged with, okay, well, can you make that happen? So very interesting scenario, because here we had diverse stakeholder groups. All are profitable companies, so everybody has their own strategy in mind, right? What it is that they want to do. But at the end of the day, we came together for the common good of the patient. And we said, okay, the way we're going to frame this is how might we accelerate innovation by fostering collaboration among organizations and institutions who typically don't collaborate, who traditionally operate more in silos. And here we had I would say like a one-day workshop, but divided over the course of about 5 hours, I want to say. And we started with, right at the very beginning, stakeholders, because this was a diverse group. You know, we had them talk in small groups about what projects they've been involved in. that were really successful as a result of the collaboration they had within their respective organizations, and what made these collaborations so successful. So kind of had this laundry list, we then prioritized, had some group sharing, and then we moved into an opportunities-driven discussion. So, you know, very openly talking about what are the challenges, you know, what's happening within the marketplace, the trends within our sector that we need to be aware of. Because again, SOAR is not about hiding any weaknesses or threats or challenges under the rug. No, it's an open discussion, and then saying, okay, within these challenges, what are some of these opportunities that these challenges and trends may present for us? And then we moved into aspirations. So what is our vision of a successful multi-stakeholder collaboration? And what impact do we want to see as a result of this collaboration? And again, every single time, there was about 55 people in this group. These were small group discussions, 5 people at a table. We then came together as a broader group, shared what each group had gone through, and then we prioritized. So at every step, you're prioritizing the strengths, the opportunities, the aspirations, and then we got down to results. So what would be those measurable outcomes that would reflect meaningful progress, you know, towards this type of a collaboration? And of course, outlining some real quick action sort of ideas that each of us could take away, and then what did it look like when we came back? So a little bit of a different example, but hopefully it shows you that still using a quick SOAR in the sense that, you know, going through it in the way that we have sort of outlined with strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. But in, you know, in this case, we had a very broad group of stakeholders. So a little bit different than the third example. So I don't know if is Jackie back, or?
She's back.
Is she? Okay, so I don't know if she wants to go back and check, you know, touch base on her examples. And if certainly people, if there's any questions anyone has, please do type them in the chat box. If you are ever struggling with, hey, you know what, I want to do something like this in my organization, I'm kind of putting together an agenda, getting a bit confused, let me know. I'm happy to type in my email. You're welcome to email me. We can sit down and go through it together, or I can just provide you some insights if you wish. So know that that door is always open, and that we will capture any challenges that you, you know, are experiencing in the chat, because I think it's very nice afterwards to share that with the group. And so any, you know, we have a lot of experience between, I'm sure, all of you as well as the team here, and we're happy to help in any way we can.
Yeah, let me just add, and I'm so sorry. Is there a question? I see Deborah jumping around.
I'm sorry. I am
Go,
so
Deborah.
glad you opened it up, because I do have a challenge at my hand, and I want to be able to use the SOARs with our board. And so I would love to have that as a separate conversation, because this process excites me and I want to test it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yes,
So Deborah, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Any of you are welcome to contact me to brainstorm, to, like I said, you want to look through an agenda, whatever it is you need, let me know, because I guarantee you that despite being in the corporate world for so many years, I went through those exact same struggles when I learned about SOAR, because, you know, you're thinking, okay, how might I reframe? And I realized afterwards that I was making it too complex. It's actually much simpler than I thought, but it really helps to kind of talk it through with somebody. So yeah, I'll do that if you know, if anybody wants to, like I said, you're more than welcome to contact me.
and I would like to add, everybody's bios are in the back of the room, and I've got a call from one of you yesterday, and we walked through an idea. And Deborah, I will offer you, and I've scaled it down. If you want to see, since you couldn't find a strategic, you said you don't have a strategic plan, I'd be happy to share with all of you the strategic plan that was co-created at the department level. And you guys can use it as a template. My dean is fine with it. He's looked at it. He's pulled out anything that's confidential. But just to give you a simple template, strategic plans are not meant to be 30, 40 pages for you. Sorry about that. The power went out in the Stavros household. Everybody was down here trying to get me back online, and I'm back. But this is the beauty of a co-presenter. And so thank you, Facia. I think I just want to point out one thing before we put you into the breakout sessions. The second example, which was about a hospital. This was a hospital in the Vancouver area. They had been through a one-day SOAR workshop. This was almost 7 or 8 years ago, and they came up after the workshop and they're like, we really need to do this tomorrow. And they, on a piece of paper, scratched out an agenda. The story is in the thin book of SOAR. And they even started the conversation with such tense people that I think Jamie might have mentioned earlier. What's a high point? What are you guys most proud of? They just asked a very generative question to get the doctors and the nurses and the people at a level of connection. Think of what we taught you in module 1 about the brain and the connection. And then they got down and they started with strengths, and they found it more powerful to talk about aspirations and results. Then they came up with opportunities. So you can read more about that. A framework is meant to be flexible, fluid, and you guys can use this how it best fits the challenge that you're dealing with. All right, Fathi, I think you were going to take them into the exercise. So I'm going to just throw it back over to you if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go to the example slide, and I think there's another slide, right?
Slide.
As the breakout groups. Yeah, here we go. So what we're going to do in our breakout groups right now is to brainstorm some strategic topics. So basically in our small group, we can choose a topic and discuss how we might frame this conversation and what questions might we ask that inspire us to have a more strategic conversation among a team. And we'll talk real life scenarios here. So again, let's make sure we discuss the items that are important to you. So we'll take about, how much time would we have for this then, Jackie?
We're going to just make sure we're all back by 12:50. So we're doing great on time. We're supposed to be going exactly where we are.
Fantastic.
And the exercise is placed already in the chat room for you all for reference.
Fantastic. So once we're in our breakout groups, that's sort of the intent. Hopefully we'll get a chance with the time that we have to go through a number of scenarios with the team.
Okay.
So we will meet back at 12:50.
All right, it looks like everybody is back. How many people wish we would have stayed in there for at least another 15 minutes, if I can see a hands out? Yeah, our team got through one, and Nicole Suzette gave us a real tough one to deal with, and we just needed more time framing. If you guys look, you can react. Give me a thumbs up if you had a great time with your teams. On your bottom, there's a reaction button. It'll disappear, but you can give a thumbs up. Look, you can't even give a thumbs down. You either get to clap or give a thumbs up. You either like it, thumbs up, or you love it and you're clapping.
Jackie, that's very strategic.
Yeah. So, yeah, we got through one issue. I wish we had time, Suzette, to help you more with yours. It's really an amazing when you have a challenge that you just need to digest that challenge you're dealing with. When a decision has been made, and how do you strategically address a decision? So I hope we at least got you thinking about it, Suzette, even though we only threw one question out. Thumbs up. Okay, so what we want to talk about as we wrap this up here is a concept. It's called strategic capacity. And I want to go back to when Facia introduced the importance of language, alignment, and stakeholders. And what you're trying to do is strategic capacity is meant to the ability of an organization to reach for its vision, mission, and goals to best service stakeholders. And stakeholders, and I think Frederick brought up a question before we went into the breakout sessions, if I recall, but usually strategic planning is top down, senior leaders. And that's the first thing that you talk about is, how are the senior leaders going to open up the strategic planning process to more stakeholders? And that's what we'll talk about next week, in being able to, who needs to be part of the conversation. What we learned in our breakout, Suzette, was sometimes stakeholders don't have a voice in the decision that was made or how to implement it, correct? You were given a 55-page report. This is what you're going to do to go back into the classroom. The type of capacity we're trying to build here, if we can follow strategic conversations, is enabling individuals in their organizations and communities to be part of the strategic conversations that you're having. And the importance of being able to plan together a strategy or a tactic. And I will say in Suzette's case that we talked about, how do you undo a decision that was made that you had no voice in? And how will you go about, our group has had a great phrase for this, no change about us without us. Thank you, Dan. And that's a great thing the Girl Scouts would say, don't do anything about me without me. And the importance of, Suzette, in your case about returning to schools, it may not work if none of the teachers go back into the classroom where they are, and they're gonna have to hopefully ask for a do-over to re-strategize. So strategic capacity is really important. That's what we want to point out as we're going to transition into this next week. Next slide, Tony, and then I think we're going to talk about some activities and open for questions. If you guys could just take a moment in the chat box and write down what is really standing out for you right now about strategic conversations, either what we talked about last week, using it in everyday interactions, or really having a challenge in figuring out how are you going to bring people together to come up with a strategy to move you forward. So we can take a look. Let's have more of them. Thank you, Rob. The flexibility, yes. The conversations. Thank you, Lisa. Keep it simple. Start from strengths. You have choices. How to strategize questions to resolve issues. Yes, and you can ask generative questions, Deborah. That's great. You're going to get people to connect and want to get engaged and help each other. Whole systems energy. It has to come from all other places. Gosh, Frederick wrote something really big. I'm scrolling back up. Cia wrote, Frederick, great question. For Cia, maybe you can speak to that. Frederick's question earlier and what your fear was. And
sure. So Frederick asked this question around the example I shared of the multi-stakeholder. And his question was, in this type of a case where you have multiple stakeholders, how easy or difficult is it to have a supplier, so let's say a stakeholder group, on board with the project if only a couple of them are part of the meeting? Which is a great question. And honestly, that was my biggest fear. I didn't know if we would succeed, and how might we, think about this so that we not only, it's good to have buy-in, but it's no good if you don't have momentum. How might we actually take this forward towards an actual collaboration down the road? It's great to develop a model, have everybody provide input, but how do you give it legs and let it carry on? So all I shared with Frederick here is that the way that, I chose to tackle it is to actually go to the different stakeholder groups. So first of all, who are those stakeholder groups? Policymakers, healthcare tech, pharma, et cetera, et cetera. Once we had those, we said, okay, who are the players in this space? And where is the strategic alignment? So if there isn't a common goal, that could be difficult. So let's focus on those where there is a common goal. We went and talked to their leadership first and said, would this be of interest? Let's talk about this. We're just opening a dialogue. We're not dictating anything. And once there was buy-in, brought them together and said, okay, until you have leadership involved and endorsing, it's not going to work. And then they were asked to appoint who the individuals might be. We didn't put a limit on how many people they could send. So there was usually anywhere from 2 to 4 people that came. And who would be able to lead that effort forward, once the first round was done, and take it, and give it legs internally, if you will, and then come back to represent on the committee. So that was how we tackled it. And actually, it worked really well. There is follow through required though, so it's good to have that action plan before people walk away from the meeting to define what that might look like.
Yeah, and I want to point out Amy Johnson. Amy, you typed a really thoughtful thing. Think about what results you want to get out of. So next week, we're going to apply the appreciative inquiry 5D cycle. Some call it the 5I. That define stage or that initiate stage is what are the results we're looking for? And who do we want to invite? And the more you invite multiple stakeholders into this process, you got to be more open to hear other voices, and your strategy is going to change a little bit in the type of questions. So Amy, thank you for pointing that out. That's really important. All right, we're gonna I'm just gonna go through some exercises you guys can practice over the week, and then we're gonna open it up for a few minutes of questions. So thank you guys for all your focus. So in the back of your workbook at the end of this module, one of the activities is, you know, kind of take time to track opportunities to have strategic conversations. You typically don't need permission to create a strategy for yourself or for the people you're supervising or for the team that you're on, and begin to explore just in journaling. What are we trying to do here? How do we align with where the department's going, where the organization is going? You typically need permission when you're going to pull 150 people together in a room, but when you're pulling your own team that you are part of, you don't. So the first activity is strategic conversations. On the next slide is you can use SOARs with your team to explore the quality of your teamwork. How well are you guys working together? Sometimes you can put, let's just get together and talk about our strengths today. There was an organization that I worked with, and the finance director took over the finance department, and they were all demoralized. They were the worst department in the organization. And she was the new ED or the finance director, and said she started from a place of strengths. And where are the opportunities for us to make wins? And they serviced not external customers to the organization, but the internal customers, the internal stakeholders. And within 90 days and over a year's time, they became a center of excellence because they started from a place of strength. So that's one activity that you guys can do and journal. The second activity, and you're going to have to do this anyways when we come to module 4, but start thinking about, you can choose one goal from either the department you're in, the team you're on, and ask yourself SOAR-based questions to discover, how are we going to get through this? Suzette, I think the strategy and the plan that your school system has come up with is probably going to implode. Would you agree? So what are you going to do to come up with a strategy when the one they said falls apart? Because at the end of the day, you care about those students, and you're going to have to do something. You're the one left reconfiguring your syllabus or your lesson plan. So that's really important. And then the third activity you can think about for the week is identifying the different levels of the system, and start asking, I wonder where the strategic plan is for my industry, or where the plan is for my organization. So we have lots of activities for you. And I think we'd like to do it this time. We've got about 2 minutes left. Is if anybody, we can take down the slides, Tony, and look at everybody and open it up for some questions or some comments for anyone.
I noticed in the chat, Dan, you mentioned about too much alignment starts to sound restrictive. And that's a great point. Thanks, Sherry, for addressing that. And I just wanted to add here that, alignment is not about, here's a set of rules, like go with it or get off the boat type of thing. It's co-created. Every step is co-created, and it's about baby steps. I would say everything is a little baby step. And that's why I love dividing people into small groups. Have your discussion. And if you have a laundry list, no problem. But before you come away from that group, align on what you want to prioritize. What do you think are the things that just have to happen? Prioritize. And then when people come together, even if it's 100 groups, 10 groups, when they come together, you'll see a lot of similarities. And if you don't, parking lot things, and say, okay, we did a small group prioritization. Now I'm going to do a big group prioritization. And that way everybody has input, and every step of the way you're incrementally moving forward, but with the group. Just like somebody said, that great quote about with us versus no change without us kind of thing. So similar concept here. every step of the way, if you take them with you, you'll find that that alignment actually happens quite naturally. It's more ownership. I look at it as, you know, people just, they want to own it. They want to know how they can run with it. And you're absolutely right. There are always going to be some things that you want to allow them to do, because otherwise it falters. So love that point you made.
All right. It's our time has ended for now, but if you have any deeper questions you want to